Coming up in this edition of Airborne, score one for the feds in the FAA versus David Riggs case. Island hopping may soon not be for the budget-minded, and Embraer celebrates a flawless debut. I'm Ashley Hale. Welcome to the Friday, November 30th edition of Airborne, here on Aero-TV. David Riggs has lost yet another battle with the feds, this time the NTSB and the FAA. FAA Acting Administrator Michael Huerta recently issued an emergency order commanding Riggs to surrender his pilot certificate. But Riggs filed an appeal with the NTSB, claiming that the flights were legal under a movie waiver. However, the FAA has repeatedly ruled that the filming of personal hero or aviation thrill videos do not qualify under the conventional cinematic waivers. On Tuesday, the NTSB Chief Administrative Law Judge agreed, rejecting Riggs' defense, and signed an order denying respondents' petition challenging administrators' emergency determination. Next up for Riggs will be a hearing before the NTSB. It's currently set for December 12th and 13th, and of course, we'll keep you up to date on this story. Well, if you're planning on flying to the Bahamas or Mexico next year, it could cost you some serious dollars. That's because those two countries, beginning February 1st and June 1st of 2013, will require aircraft operating there to include an installed 406 Emergency Locator Transmitter. Caribbean Flying Adventures researched this issue and found that the U.S. Coast Guard continues to utilize the 121.5 frequency in their search and rescue operations. Thus, mandating the installation of the 406 ELT makes little sense for island flying. Additionally, the International Civil Aviation Organization has concluded that the installed ELT is useless once the aircraft sinks after the passengers have safely exited the plane. A handheld personal locator beacon then becomes the optimal search and rescue tool. CFA has successfully collaborated with civil aviation authorities in the Dominican Republic and the Cayman Islands to obtain a waiver from the 406 ELT requirement. The Dominican Republic waiver is indefinite, and the Cayman Islands waiver is valid through December 1st, 2013, but will almost certainly be extended. Waivers for the Bahamas and Mexico, however, will expire as scheduled, after which the ELTs will become required equipment. Embraer's Legacy 500 mid-size business jet impressed everyone with what the pilots called a flawless first flight Tuesday at its headquarters in Brazil. Embraer test pilots flew the aircraft for 1 hour and 45 minutes, performing handling and performance characteristics evaluations. As a result of the extensive simulation use and ground testing, the aircraft was able to cover a significant flight envelope on its maiden flight. The Legacy 500 is a clean sheet design, which Embraer says included extensive input from operators and customers. The airplane is the first mid-size business jet incorporating a fly-by-wire control system and full 6-foot stand-up cabin with a flat floor. It will be followed by Embraer's fourth clean sheet design, the mid-light Legacy 450, which will enter service 1 year later. Deliveries of the Legacy 500 are expected to begin in 2014. Can you say cha-ching? Officials of Bombardier certainly can, in light of what is being called the largest single transaction in the history of business aviation. Luxury transportation company VistaJet has placed a firm order for 56 new Bombardier Global aircraft, with 86 further options. The deal has a value of more than $7.8 billion at list prices. The new global aircraft order is a continuation of the company's strategic decision to fast-track the growth of the fleet, focusing on wide-cabin, long-range aircraft to provide non-stop point-to-point global coverage. In the air, VistaJet has been growing what is already one of the largest business aviation flight crew rosters worldwide, to ensure that it has flight crew availability 24/7 anywhere in the world. On the ground, VistaJet has doubled its dedicated sales force across these emerging markets to establish further presence and support for existing and new customers. First deliveries of this order are expected in 2014. Well, he may not be acting much longer. South Carolina Republican Senator Jim DeMint has put aside his objections to the confirmation of Michael Huerta as FAA administrator. DeMint had been blocking the confirmation hearings until after the election, which would have allowed Governor Romney to make his own nomination for the post should he have been elected president. With the election decided and the White House not changing hands, DeMint, who will likely be named as the top Republican on the Senate Commerce Committee next year, removed his objection Tuesday, according to the Washington Post. It was not immediately known if there were any other objections to the Huerta confirmation in the Senate, or if the confirmation could be done by unanimous consent. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid said that Huerta might be confirmed as part of a group of non-controversial nominees. You're watching Airborne, more in a moment.
Redbird Skyport is a multifaceted aviation laboratory charged with developing innovative solutions to the issues facing the industry.
It started out as a vision for a laboratory where we could objectively measure the systems and the processes that we were developing. Being able to put some objective measures behind the anecdotal evidence that we have about the value of motion and the application of this technology is very, very important, because until we can objectively measure it and play that data back, we can't design training systems that make the best use of it.
For more information about Redbird flight simulations, as well as Redbird's new Skyport, visit www.redbirdflightsimulations.com or www.redbirdskyport.com.
Thanks for joining us. Remember, if you'd like to suggest a story for Airborne, Aero-TV, our website, or our podcast, you can drop us an email anytime to news-fi@aero-news.net. Well, Cessna has entered into a joint venture contract with China Aviation Industry General Aircraft Company Limited through CAIGA North China Aircraft Industry Company for the formation of a joint venture company to conduct final assembly of the Cessna Caravan utility turboprop aircraft in China for the Chinese market. Cessna's Wichita, Kansas operations will provide components and parts manufacturing and sub-assemblies for the Caravan aircraft to be sold by the joint venture. Joint venture's operations in Shijiazhuang will be designed to conduct final assembly, paint, testing, interior installation, customization, flight testing, and delivery of the Cessna Caravan to in-country customers. Management of the joint venture will include board members from both Cessna and CAIGA. The joint venture contract also contemplates the possibility of designing and assembling new models of utility turboprop aircraft in the future. Formation of the joint venture company remains subject to various government approvals and customary conditions. President Obama signed into law on Tuesday the European Union Emissions Trading Scheme Prohibition Act of 2011, which directs the Secretary of Transportation to prohibit U.S. aircraft operators from participating in the ETS. The law directs the FAA, the DOT, and other appropriate officials to enter into international negotiations, including agreements to pursue a worldwide approach to address aircraft emissions, and to take appropriate measures under existing authorities to ensure U.S. air carriers are held harmless from any ETS unilaterally imposed by the EU. Earlier this month, the EU announced that it would suspend enforcement of the ETS, while the airline industry and its customers should view this with cautious optimism. The suspension is only temporary. The USS Truman is set to make aviation history as the first aircraft carrier to host test operations for an unmanned aircraft. A team from the Navy Unmanned Combat Air System Program Office has embarked aboard the USS Truman to conduct tests and demonstrations of the X-47B unmanned aerial system. The purpose of the exercise is to demonstrate seamless integration of the X-47B, which boasts a wingspan of more than 62 feet, wider than that of an FA-18 Super Hornet, into carrier flight deck operations. During each demonstration, the X-47B will be controlled remotely via a handheld control display unit. The X-47B test will be conducted over a 3-week period, which will include in-port and underway demonstration aboard Truman. Time once again for ANN's Editor-in-Chief Jim Campbell to speak his mind in our weekly feature called Barnstorming. Today, Jim gazes into his crystal ball as he begins to compile the ANN agenda for the coming new year.
Thanks, Ashley. Hi, folks. I was just looking at the calendar a moment ago and realized that, December was just right around the corner, and with that, the end of the year. When the end of year approaches, it gives us at ANN an opportunity to look back a little bit and talk about the news that we covered. But instead of that, I'd like to talk a little bit about the news that we expect to cover, and more important, what we as ANN and what we as citizens of the aviation community hope to do with what will obviously be a turbulent and complex year, 2013. Now, we're going to have a number of effects both within the industry and outside the industry to contend with. We have the fiscal cliff that could conceivably have a tremendous effect on the FAA, our transportation infrastructure, and just what happens down the line. So, who knows from there. We also have an administration that has not been very kind to aviation, and we're going to have to work around that. It seems to me that there's some opportunities here. First and foremost, aviation needs to put a better face on who and what we are. Normally, that would be a good job for the associations, but with EAA having to deal with the post-Hightower turmoil and Jack Pelton having a full-time job in front of him despite his retirement just to get EAA back on track, and with continued problems at AOPA that seem to be getting worse by the minute and more questionable by the minute, especially with this recent AOPA holding company investment thing that just seems to be a conflict of interest times 10. Well, we don't have a whole lot of faith in the organizations right now to put the best face on aviation when they can't even put the best faces on themselves. So you in the community need to demand more from your associations. You need to demand that EAA get its act together, do what it needs to do, and get on with the process of being EAA and all that it entails. We need to demand more from AOPA in terms of transparency, honesty, and for God's sakes, doing something that actually benefits the entire industry rather than AOPA's bank book and whatever it takes to keep Craig in limousines. Now let's talk about the FAA. This one really bugs me. The FAA is still totally demoralized, totally disorganized, and not working on behalf of the best interests of aviation. You want to see the FAA be a kinder, gentler FAA? 1. Cut the regulations in 2. There's no way that this complex series of regulations can't be halved and still be safe. We need to look at more outreach from the FAA to being better citizens in the community. Good example, these multi-day LSA audits for the companies that don't really need them, where all the emphasis is on the bureaucracy and not on safety and not on airworthiness. Please, it just doesn't make any sense at all. And then, of course, there's the issues that continue to go on with ignoring the really bad stuff and penalizing the really small stuff. I could go on and on. But what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to leave it up to you. I'd like to hear more about what you think will change our fortunes in 2013, but I'm going to throw this on you a little bit more. What are you willing to do? How will you, as a citizen of the aviation community, invoke your rights and your privileges as aviators and help this community live, grow, and prosper into the future? And we'll be talking a lot more about that in the future. But for the moment, for Aero-News, Airborne, and Aero-TV, I'm Jim Campbell. Let's have a happy new year. Talk to you later.
Finally this week, the elementary school ritual of show and tell took on an historic meaning Wednesday, when 5 Apollo 11 moon rocks were transferred from the Minnesota National Guard to the Minnesota Historical Society in front of an audience of children at the Science and Technology Academy's Reinforcing Basic Aviation and Space Exploration Starbase, Minnesota. The students are currently studying about the moon. Making the ceremony all the more important was the fact that until recently these rocks had been locked away amongst other military artifacts in a storage area at the Veterans Service Building in St. Paul. Until the recent discovery, no one seemed to know the rocks were missing, and the National Guard officials say they had no idea how the display came to be tucked away in the storage facility, or even how long it had been there. The Apollo 11 display was presented in 1970 to the people of Minnesota through the office of then-Governor Levander. Identical displays were given to all 50 states by then-President Richard Nixon. A second display from the Apollo 17 mission was presented in 1973 to the people of Minnesota through the office of then-Governor Anderson. But the people of Minnesota need not hang their heads in shame. Apparently, moon rocks have had a history of going missing. In fact, Eifert said in researching the artifact found in Minnesota, he discovered that most of the samples from both the Apollo 11 and Apollo 17 missions that were handed out by President Nixon have gone missing. Get comprehensive, real-time, 24/7 coverage of the latest aviation and aerospace stories anytime at aero-news.net. And remember, Airborne is streamed twice weekly and is always online. Join us again next Tuesday for another edition of Airborne. I'm Ashley Hale. Thanks for watching.